Welcome back to the live stage. I'm so excited to be here with my colleague, Brett, and I get to interview him a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do for TGC?
Yeah, so I am a senior editor for TGC. I have worked for the Gospel Coalition for about a year and a half now. It's been so fun to work with Melissa, among other editors. We have a great editorial team. All of us are all over the country, though, so I'm based in LA on the West Coast. I think I'm the only TGC editor on the West Coast, and you're on the other side of the country. So
you have to get up a lot earlier for our editorial calls.
I do, yeah. We have these editorial calls at, I guess it's 9 your time, but 7 my time. So yeah, that's the downside, being on the West Coast with most of the East Coast colleagues. But yeah, so my work at the Gospel Coalition, I kind of focus on arts and culture. So anything related to movies, music, TV, technology, just trends in culture, how the gospel applies to that. So yeah, I think it's a natural bridge for evangelism and just sharing the gospel in a secular age. So I'm really interested in finding those areas in movies and just the questions that are being asked in art and culture that the gospel can speak to. So that's the sort of thing I get to write about and edit for the Gospel Coalition, and it's just really fun.
I've enjoyed your pieces so much. Well, a couple of things. Like it's helped me think really differently about what I'm watching. I think it's Bird Box.
Bird Box. Yeah.
You know, I hadn't heard about it, and so it was so helpful. I think you commissioned that piece, actually.
Yeah, Karen Swallow Pryor wrote that.
Yes, you commissioned it. And so it's so helpful to think through. I would have just watched it in one way, but to think through it Christianly and what this is kind of pointing towards as we're watching whatever it could be, or listening to. And one thing I love that you put together was our Spotify mix for Christmas. But did you just do another one?
Yeah, we're listening to it right now, and it's kind of drowning our interview out a bit, but yeah, I get to put Spotify playlists together, and there's just cool things you can do with new media forms like that. So I put together a playlist for the conference inspired by the theme, Conversations with Jesus. So yeah, worked with Caroline Cobb to do that. So.
Oh, that's great. I really did. I kept the Christmas one on the whole Christmas season. So it's so nice. I love finding recommendations for music because sometimes you just get in a rut and you're like, oh, what should I listen to? And so I find it so helpful to hear new music from friends.
Yeah. There's so much good music out there. So one of the things that I love about the platform of the Gospel Coalition is just shining a light on lesser-known artists and helping people discover, good stuff that's out there. One of the challenges that I find just in popular culture today is there's so much of it. Like Netflix is... I get anxiety going on Netflix, like trying to figure out what to watch because there's just so much. Same is true with music. Like the internet has just exploded the amount of content and culture out there. So I think you need people who can be trusted voices to recommend good stuff. And there's people that are that for me, that I trust their recommendations to kind of sift through the glut of information to find the gems and to find the good stuff. So that's kind of what I want to do at the Gospel Coalition, is to point Christians to the good, the true, the beautiful in popular culture, and maybe help them avoid the stuff that isn't helpful and isn't edifying, because there's a lot of that out there. So yeah, it's a fun job.
Well, our theme is on conversations with Jesus, or is it conversations with Jesus?
No, you got it right.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I was thinking,
we should know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We should know this. We've been praying for this for a year,
I know,
so we
right?
should know about this.
Yeah.
How can we take what we do see in common culture? Yeah. Do you have any good ideas of movies or plays that you've seen? And how can we use what we see in the world? And we know that our friends who might not know Christ are watching and listening to, whether it's This Is Us or it's a movie, that everybody's talking about. How can we use those things of earth to have spiritual conversations with others?
Yeah. I think it's a very natural segue. A lot of times, movies, arts, culture are oftentimes good at asking questions. I think they're good at giving voice to the questions that people have about God, about existence, about meaning. And so even just watching a film with someone and kind of having that conversation afterwards, like what is this movie like wrestling with? What questions is it asking? And how can the gospel kind of answer them or bring clarity to them? There's an artist, Mako Fujimura, who once said...
I couldn't have said that name. I'm glad you got that.
Oh, Mako Fujimura. He's a great artist in New York. But he once said something to the effect of, art poses the questions to which faith is the answer or offers an answer. And I think that's a really good way of looking at the way that the arts can be a bridge, especially in a secular age where it may not be as easy to just kind of have a conversation that goes straight to Jesus or straight to religion. But pop culture can be a really natural bridge because it is asking those questions that are spiritual in nature. They're questions about the longings we have and the transcendence we're all looking for in this kind of this secular age that's very imminent, and it's about the here and now. But you look at the movies, and the most popular movies these days are ghost stories, like supernatural movies. So I think that's interesting, that even in a Western world that would say we deny the supernatural, we live in this very imminent kind of frame, the movies and culture is full of mystery and probing, kind of trying to break out of that secular frame.
That's really interesting. It's funny. My husband a few years ago taught a Sunday school class. I think it was called Theology at the Movies. Yeah. And one thing that we talked about in that class was how all the different genres, even the horror genres in a surprising way, are reflective of something in the bigger story.
Yeah.
One thing that the romance is, the reason we love romance is because it's ultimately pushing us toward the great romance, which is Christ and his bride.
Yeah.
But that there's something in us that all these stories, they're always pointing to the bigger story, even though they're secular. They don't know that they're borrowing, but that God speaks through stories to us, and that he's writing this grand narrative, and that we play a part of it. And movies are a reflection of that, even when they're from a secular perspective. They don't know what they're doing sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of common grace. So I talk about common grace a lot in my writing about the arts and culture, because it's this idea that even a secular artist who doesn't have any faith or would never call what they're doing religious or invoke the name of God, like by common grace, they nevertheless can present something that is kind of reflective of truth and the truth of the gospel, even in kind of roundabout ways. So I wrote an article a couple months ago, you might remember it, for the Gospel Coalition. It was called 9 Movie Moments of Unmerited Grace. And I looked at specific scenes in movies that to me felt like a depiction of the beautiful arrival of grace when you're least expected, like you're rescued with nothing you can do can save yourself. So it's things like Captain Phillips, which is a movie about this true story about this guy who was stranded he was abducted by Somali pirates, and the way he was rescued at the end of the movie is just jarring, because he's like out of nowhere, rescuers come, pluck him out of the captor's hands, and he's safe. Or the end of Dunkirk is another one I had on that list, where the people on the beaches of Dunkirk in World War II felt like there was no hope. They were completely lost. There was no getting out of that dilemma, but suddenly the end of the movie, the ships arrive and rescue them. So I just I'd made that article just an example of the ways that you don't have to look all that hard in pop culture to find these depictions, these common grace graspings for the truth that we know as Christians that we would call grace and special grace.
And there's that beautiful picture that we all want to be rescued. It's amazing how much that carries through so many stories. Like, it looks just dark and then the dawn comes. And it seems to be this continual theme in literature and movie or in TV shows. And it really is that picture. When you look at the stories of Scripture, they're all pointing, like when I think of Noah's Ark, there's a rescue, there's one rescuer. When you think of Rahab and the spies, there was one house you could be in that wasn't destroyed. When you think of Lot, there was one family rescued. And we love the rescue story because it's pointing to this better rescue. And I think that's exactly what this conference is about. Really, that the reason we evangelize, the reason we share the gospel is because we're in that dire need. We're on the Dunkirk beach in need of rescue. And so often we can just be living our lives. And I think we can look at our non-Christian neighbor and we can think, well, they're fine. It looks like their life's working out for them, and so it's so
I'm sure
easy.
that's not the case, though. And everyone, I think everyone, if they're honest with themselves, does admit that they need rescue. And we live in this kind of self-sufficient, that's the mantra, right? Like, just pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Like, you take ownership of your life. Like, you are the only one who can control, your dreams, making your dreams a reality. But that's just a burden. Like, to kind of, at the end of the day, we can't do that. We can't achieve our greatest dreams. Not that, we can't do a lot with the gifts God has given us, but ultimately we need help. We need divine intervention. We need rescue. And I think you see in pop culture that is an existential longing that people have. That's a real thing that people resonate with.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. It's been so fun to get to talk with Brett. Check his articles out. They're so great. I really do love getting to read them and listen. Go and look for the Spotify list that he made for this conference and spend some time worshiping the God of our rescue.